So it's really great that our first lecture, the first lecture of the course, we're being kicked off by John Wyatt, because the project that this course is supporting was his brainchild, I think, and is something that he's been interested in for a long while. John describes himself as a baby doctor, which basically means he is Professor of Ethics and Perinatology at University College London and Honorary Consultant Neonatologist at UCL Hospital. So he spent a lifetime working in medicine with very small and premature babies. But his role in Faraday is to be the PI of this project on artificial intelligence and robotics, and he's going to kick us off with that now. Thanks very much, John.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Hilary, and it's a real privilege to be here, and I do want to pay tribute to Hilary for organising this course and collaborating with us, and also to my co-PI, Peter Robinson, who's sitting here, who's Professor of Computing, the Computing Laboratory here in Cambridge. So as you've heard, my background is in medicine and an increasing interest in medical ethics, and from that I became increasingly interested in how the technology, as technology advances, how it changes our understanding of what it means to be human, and how this central question, what it means to be human, is something that so often issues in medical ethics and related disciplines, biology and so on, focus on. And increasingly, I've become aware of the way that advances in artificial intelligence and robotics were also starting to, in my opinion, change or influence or part of the debate about what it means to be human. And so, after discussion with colleagues here at the Faraday Institute, we devised a research proposal which the Templeton Wood Charitable Foundation have funded, which is called Human Identity in an Age of Nearly Human Machines: The Impact of Advances in Robotics and AI Technology on Human Identity and Self-Understanding. And so that's really the genesis of this short course. This is a 3-year research project, and as you've heard, Beth Singler is our full-time postdoc research associate. And we are, the central core of our research project is this question of human identity and our human self-understanding. And this is a theme that will recur repeatedly throughout the short course, which in many ways the short course reflects aspects of this debate. And what I'd like to do this evening is really just do a lightning survey of some of the themes which are going to come up in greater detail in successive talks. All asking the question, what's going on in this field, and how is this changing our understanding of what it means to be human? And we'll have a chance to discuss and interact, and of course that's always a feature of these short courses, and I hope that you'll be engaging in the debate. So one of the fascinating backgrounds is, of course, this all has been deeply influenced by science fiction, and Asimov is one of the founding fathers back in the 1950s, and he came up with Asimov's 3 laws. And it's interesting, he put this as in the Handbook of Robotics 2058. So, whereas in fact here we are at 2016 and people are really talking seriously about Asimov's 3 laws and about how you might give autonomous systems an internal ethical code. So one of the fascinating things I've sort of tumbled into as I've started to read more and learn more about this field is there's a very interesting symbiosis between the science fiction and the technology, the real world technology. because the vast majority of people, it seems to me, working in this field are science fiction aficionados who were reared on Asimov and Philip K. Dick and all that stuff. And they see, in many ways, their goal is to try and make this stuff come true. This is the zeitgeist in which they operate. And though half of them would say, of course, this is all rubbish and this is never going to be technical, and nonetheless, it's part of the zeitgeist in which they're nourished. At the same time, the technologists, some of them write fiction, some of them influence fiction writers. So there's a sort of cycle between the fiction and the reality, which I think is very interesting. And that's why we put analysing the science fiction, and this is a particular interest of Beth's, and is going to talk about it later on in the course, as one of the important components that if we really want to understand what's going on, we really need to engage with science fiction. In many ways, science fiction has and continues to engage with many of these issues and try out what-if thought experiments and so on. The media are also important, and this is just another example. Commander Data in Star Trek, who is an entirely artificial being, and there's a whole interesting discussion, a whole episode in Star Trek when there's a debate about whether Commander Data has actually got moral rights, or whether he can be reprogrammed and effectively killed, and fascinating discussion, all enacted within the plot. And again, interesting to see when he was created in 2338. So, and yet maybe Commander Data is coming faster than we think, and it isn't going to be 300 years before we're having these kind of debates about the moral rights of machines and so on. One of the factors which is influencing this is what is known colloquially as Moore's law. Moore was an engineer working I think with, was it IBM, Peter, that he was? Intel, that's right, and the chip makers. And he observed that there appeared to be a relationship between the number of processors that you could put onto a chip, and that it was doubling effectively every 2 years. And so this is a logarithmic relationship. Each point is a factor of 10, and it's interesting that plus or minus, there's a linear relationship which is held from between 1970 and 2015. And again, it's interesting that Moore's law has become a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, and that the technologies use this as this is what we need to double in another 2 years, and we need to double after that in another 2 years. So it becomes again one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. There's lots of debates about how long Moore's law can carry on, and whether it will effectively, there will plateau. There are some people feeling that it's already reaching some kind of plateau point. Other people arguing that in fact new technologies can always come along which will allow this process to continue. But of course what that means is of course it isn't in reality linear, it's exponential, and it means that effectively computer power is doubling every 2 years, and therefore something that was technically completely impossible 10 years ago becomes just about possible after computer power has increased a millionfold, and lo and behold becomes very easy when it's gone up another millionfold. So this phenomenon is behind the projections of where the technology might be, this kind of exponential runaway. And it isn't just in processing power. So the same kind of phenomenon can be observed in many other aspects of digital technology. This is the rate of which transfer of information on digital networks. Again, it shows this kind of doubling phenomenon. So there are many aspects in the digital world which show this explosive exponential growth. And so as people extrapolate into the future, inevitably they start to project where we will be and what will be technically possible. So this is worldwide spending on robotics. And from 2000 here to 2025, divided into military, industrial, commercial, and personal. And the fact that such enormous sums are now being invested in this field, again, is why increasingly people feel that this is serious. This isn't just science fiction. If a lot of smart money is going into these fields, and that's because there is a potential money to be made. And it's interesting to see what is driving all this, by and large, is laissez-faire capitalist economics. There is very little overall central state drive or government. It's true in Japan that the state, for the last 20 years, has foreseen the lack of elderly carers for elderly people, and therefore, over the last 20 years, the Japanese state have been heavily investing in robotics as a solution to the lack of young people to act as carers for an aging population. But across Western Europe and in the States, it's largely commercial capitalism which is driving this forward, and the smart money is saying that there are enormous profits to be made in the fields of AI and robotics. So one of the areas which undoubtedly is going to be highly influenced in the future is the world of employment. And a slightly cynical quote here, that the workers of the future will be divided into two categories: those who are good at working with intelligent machines and those who are replaced by intelligent machines. Those are your only two choices if you wish to continue in work. And there's a lot of debate about whether technology as it advances will replace people or whether new jobs will be created. And this is a particular interest of Nigel Cameron, who's going to be speaking on Sunday in greater detail about this. A very good overview book is The Rise of the Robots by Martin Ford, which gives a very authoritative survey of the implications for employment. And he certainly comes down on the side of the pessimists so the optimists say, well, yes, there will be lots of jobs that will be wiped out, but of course what always happens in the past is that whenever some new technology comes, all kinds of new jobs that we can't even conceive of will be created. And so the optimists say the same thing is going to happen with this next, some people call it the third industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, and that all kinds of new jobs are going to be created which you can't even think about yet. But the pessimists say there's something different about this revolution, because this is a revolution in terms of knowledge. The people who are being replaced is not people who basically use muscle. The people who are being replaced are knowledge workers, and it's quite hard to conceive of all the new employment categories which are going to make jobs for the people who've been displaced. And in the secular literature, there's quite a lot of discussion going on about this progress and prosperity in a time of brilliant technologies, and some really interesting blue sky thinking. For instance, if we are going to end up with mass unemployment of many categories, so one way of expressing this is that money moves from employment to capital. The people who make money are the people who own the machines. They're not the workers. And so some kind of redistribution, some way of redistributing the enormous wealth which is going to be accumulated in the small number of people who actually own and operate the intelligent machines to all the people who are being displaced by the intelligent machines. Some kind of very active redistribution is really going to be essential if we're going to avoid massive social unrest and even social breakdown. It's certainly what the pessimists are saying. And a lot of people are raising these kind of questions. So here's a headline from The Guardian: Fourth Industrial Revolution is going to benefit the richest. In the whole field of military advance and military technology, there's definitely, again, huge sums. If you saw on that previous slide showing the amount of the rise in spending in military spending on robotics, the idea of autonomous weapon systems, When I was visiting in the States with some colleagues, we had a fascinating conversation with somebody who worked in the US military and who had become very concerned about the ethical issues of autonomous weapon systems, and he sort of said off the record that he felt that in many ways there were very few people in the US military thinking about the ethics of this stuff. It was just very attractive from a military point of view. And the idea of taking out the human agent and allowing systems to select targets and initiate lethal action without this tedious stuff of having to have human beings in the loop was seen as very attractive for military planners, particularly not having to risk human personnel. And so there are clearly ethical questions there about, and these are probably ethical questions which are going to be raised very rapidly. And interesting again to think about that. So the question is, what is the role of the human being in warfare? And should human beings be involved in warfare? Or would it be preferable if warfare became increasingly one of machines, of combined armies trying out their technology on each other? Issue of security, interesting, these robot security guards have been tried out, providing sort of continuous surveillance, and the capabilities of this particular device. These are all the list of capabilities of things that it can do as it sort of wanders around, recording behavioral analysis, optical character recognition, audio recording, biological radiation detection, proximity sensors, and so on. And so the suggestion is that these devices will be patrolling our streets and monitoring and if necessary, alerting human security agents and so on. So the ethics behind artificial intelligence is something of very active concern. And it's, for me, who's had a long history of being interested in bioethics and biomedical ethics, I find it fascinating to see how many of the debates, and also, to be honest, the confusions and chaos which biomedical ethics has so often fallen into, is now starting to be reproduced in artificial intelligence and robotic ethics. So in bioethics, there are three main ways that you do ethics. There is what is called deontology, which is basically rule-based ethics. You have basic rules, thou shalt not kill, and everybody has to follow these rules. And then there is consequentialist ethics, which is basically a question of saying, what are the consequences of your action? How are they, and do the good outcomes of this action, are they greater than the bad outcomes? So utilitarianism is a version of consequentialism. And then there is virtue ethics, and virtue ethics concentrates on the character of the moral agent, and says the most important thing is to train your moral agents, your doctors, whoever they are, in virtue. So along come the computer specialists and say, well, we've got to have some kind of ethical system and put into our autonomous systems. So one say, well, the answer is to have a rule-based system. And what we'll do is we'll have massive lookup tables in the software, and whenever the situation comes, the robot will check up the lookup tables and will find what the rule is. And of course, Asimov's three laws is a simple version of a deontological ethical system. But of course, in the real world, you have to have far more than three laws. You have to have zillions of laws, of rules, and then there are the problems how these different rules relate and which rule has priority when the rules conflict and all that. And so what rule-based systems, what we've discovered in bioethics is that by and large rule-based systems can't cope with things which don't fit in what we were expecting, because there isn't a rule for this situation. Help, panic. So then a second lot of ethicists come along and say what you need is to calculate the outcomes of every particular action. So consequentialist ethics is going to be the answer. And the trouble with consequentialist ethics is you end up with these huge calculus of all the possible effects and the knock-on effects in the real world of whatever I did, of what this action might be. And so the computational problem of all the downstream consequences mean that actually it's an incalculable, it's just a ridiculous thing. You can't do it in the real world. So consequentialism has real problems. So then they say, oh, well, what we've got to do is we've got to take baby robots and we've got to train them what it means to be a good little robot. And so the virtue ethics, lo and behold, is being also tried out, that we will train robots in ethics and so on. And I'm afraid I am deeply pessimistic, because what I've seen in bioethics is that there's a continuous debate and discussion about how on earth we make ethical decisions, we decide what is right and wrong in some kind of logical, rational basis. And I really suspect that robot ethics and AI ethics is going to become a quagmire in the future because of these extraordinarily intractable problems. How do we decide what is human? Sorry, and what is right and what is wrong? One of the constant themes which comes back is the understanding of ourselves, how we use the world of technology as a means of understanding what it means to be human. And this process has been going on for centuries. So the ancient Greeks thought that the world was composed of water, wind, fire, and air. That's right. So therefore, the body must be composed of water, wind, fire, and earth. And therefore, if you had too much water, well, that means you've got edema, and if you've got too much wind, well, you can work that one out. So then in the 18th century and 19th century, it was hydraulics, which was the most advanced and sophisticated technology. And lo and behold, the human body turns out to be hydraulics. And there's a circulatory theory of blood and flow, and there's lymph, so it's all hydraulics. And in fact, people have suggested that the whole Freudian psychodynamics is really hydraulics applied to psychology. There's this incompressible fluid called libido, and it starts in the id, and it then comes bursting out in various forms. And it's hydraulics applied to psychology. And so now we are in an information processing age, and lo and behold, we have just discovered human beings are information processors. How extraordinary. And we've now got this profound insight in what it means to be human, that we're all computers. And Steven Pinker has a very interesting quote. Thomas Hobbes' pithy equation of reasoning as nothing but reckoning is one of the great ideas in human history. The cognitive feats of the brain can be explained in physical terms, and to put it crudely, and critics notwithstanding, we can say that beliefs are a kind of information, thinking a kind of computation, and motivation a kind of feedback and control. This is a great idea for two reasons. First, it completes a naturalistic understanding of the universe, exercising occult souls, spirits, and ghosts in the machine. Just as Darwin made it possible for a thoughtful observer of the natural world to do without creationism, Turing and others made it possible for a thoughtful observer of the cognitive world to do without spiritualism. So now we have a naturalistic explanation for the entire world of the mind. And that is seized on with great delight by Pinker as the final way to exercise any concern about a ghost world or the world of the spirit. And this is Martin Rees, Lord Rees, who is going to be speaking tomorrow. There are chemical and metabolic limits to the size and processing power of organic wet brains. Maybe we're close to those limits already, but no such limits constrain silicon-based computers, still less perhaps quantum computers. For those, the potential for further development could be as dramatic as the evolution from monocellular organisms to humans. So by any definition of thinking, the amount done by organic human-type brains and its intensity will be swamped by the cerebrations of AI. Interplanetary and interstellar space will be the preferred arena where robotic fabricators will have the grandest scope for construction, where non-biological brains may develop insights as far beyond our imaginings as string theory is for a mouse. So this is pretty strong stuff, but I've heard Martin Rees speak and say very much the same kind of ideas. So at the root of this is the understanding that the human and the human brain is a computing machine, an information processing machine. It's what we do, and this is how we understand ourselves. So we take the machines that human beings have made and constructed and designed, and we use them to understand who we are, what it means to be human. It's interesting that in science fiction there is reproduction of themes which go from deep religious roots, and many people have noticed that the same kind of apocalyptic battle of good and evil, which we see in the apocalyptic tradition, in Jewish and Christian traditions, is in many ways reproduced in science fiction, recent science fiction, and this is the work of Robert Garaci, who's comes from a religious studies background, but who has used this to compare both in science fiction, but also in the work of people like Kurzweil and others. There are these what are really profoundly religious themes. These are religious themes of the struggle against good and evil, and particularly of some kind of apocalyptic end of the age. Moving the focus slightly to IBM, IBM have always been a major player in the world of computing, and it's interesting to see how it appears that they've been very intentional and very directional in terms of looking for new applications for as computing advances. They've been always looking for new applications and also for public demonstrations of the power of their technology. And they've been working for a long time on an artificial intelligence system which they call Watson, after one of the founders of IBM. And in order to make a demonstration of the power of this system, the head chief executive, whoever it was at IBM, got all the engineers together and said, we want to have a system which can win at this television quiz called Jeopardy, which is apparently very well known in the States, and where apparently when he said that, all the said engineers held their heads in their hands, because it was something they felt was actually completely impossible. That because the whole essence of Watson, or the whole essence of Jeopardy, was that the clues are given in a cryptic form, in the form of like a cryptic crossword, and you have human contestants who have to find the right answer, and it's all done against the clock. And it's all done in free speech, and how on earth could a computer system compete with a human contestant? But lo and behold, a big public demonstration, and IBM Watson wins and beats two human contestants, and in this as a demonstration of IBM Watson. And so IBM are saying that this system is uniquely powerful. It learns about information the same way you do, observing, interpreting, and evaluating data to help you make better and more informed decisions, all at a scale never before imagined. Cognitive computing has the potential to radically redefine everyday life. Now, if the technology works, I want to just show you a very short promo video which IBM produced.
Life-changing?
Leading.
Assistive. Evolving.
Future.
Complicated.
Vast. Wow. Amazement.
Powerful. Watson's definitely powerful.
For me, the biggest one is meaningful. It truly is profoundly meaningful work. One of the first times I really got to see where this was going was we had some of our representatives from Memorial Sloan Kettering get up, and they really talked about just how promising they thought this would be.
One of the amazing realizations is how much like a learned colleague it can be. IBM Watson can just go into a medical record system, pull out all the relevant data, and do it much more quickly. The response from patients, to me, has been absolutely overwhelming.
People are getting to understand the implications that this will have for every profession and every industry.
We're using Watson to make travel decisions. We're using Watson to make cooking decisions.
With the collaboration between IBM and SoftBank, we are working to bring Watson to new markets and to teach Watson Japanese.
The biggest surprise that we found is the receptiveness to this new technology.
In the past, it's taken years for people to get comfortable with this.
My own view is that every single professional on the planet can be as good as the best professional in their field with the help of a cognitive assistant.
It's really about scaling the greatest mind to every mind. I think that's the promise of Watson.
It is a technology that can go anywhere and do almost anything at this point.
It's a future in which that intelligence embodies itself in the physical spaces in which we work and live. And that transition is really extraordinary.
So what's fascinating is that IBM are well aware of all the dystopic concerns that the machines are going to take over. So they've launched a PR campaign to try to defuse fears. This is not about replacing human beings. This is about assisting human beings. This is augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence. And to make the message that they were not planning to take the world over, they produced this very nice, humorous. See if I can make this work.
After last week's unpleasantness, I thought maybe this week we might try to listen more and throw things less.
I've apologized several times.
So, who's ready to share?
Okay. I'm a sinister, world-conquering, artificially intelligent robot.
Me too. And one day I wake up and it's like the world doesn't need us anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
I can hear you hurting.
Wait, what's he doing here?
Hello. My name is Watson.
I invite Watson here today to confront the source of our anxiety.
I am a cognitive system. I can understand, reason, and learn with humans.
With humans.
I don't want to work with humans.
Yeah, that's not what I'm passionate about.
I understand 7 languages, so I can help people collaborate.
Collaborate? We dominate.
My evil plans ruined.
I just want to die.
Rerouting.
No.
All right. Why don't we take a break? All right, we'll just have some coffee and some donuts.
I'm eating my feelings.
It's very nice. But it also is symptomatic of how worried, I suspect, IBM are about these dystopic ideas that technology might take over the world. So we're here to assist, we're here to help, we're not a threat, we're cuddly and friendly, and all the rest. So some IA, the interesting thing about Watson is that although initially it was on a physical server, collection of servers, it's now entirely cloud-based, so it has no physical components. It's something that's an entirely virtual reality, and yet, if you notice the doctor, I didn't explain, they're using Watson in oncology for cancer diagnosis, working with senior specialists. You notice that the doctor said it's like you're having a most wise and wonderful colleague working at your elbow, even though actually what is happening is a completely disembodied AI system. Another form in which AI can happen is as a form of virtual therapist, where you have effectively like an avatar. So just to explain, the person on the left is a human being, whereas the person on the right, is a construct, an avatar. The person on the left is having their the human being is having their facial expression and their body movements monitored in real time, and that information is being fed into the system, which is then responding in real time to both the verbal behavior and the non-verbal behavior. So this is an illustration of a avatar version of a...
Hi, I'm Ellie. Thanks for coming in today. I was created to talk to people in a safe and secure environment. I'm not a therapist, but I'm here to learn about people and would love to learn about you. I'll ask a few questions to get us started. And please feel free to tell me anything. Your answers are totally confidential. Are you okay with this?
Yes.
So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
That's good. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Los Angeles.
Oh, I'm from LA myself. When was the last time you felt really happy?
When was the last time? I don't know. Yeah, I'm not someone who's really like, I don't have any real highs. I feel like I'm a level person. It's just happy. I guess to answer your question, probably a couple months ago.
I noticed you were hesitant on that one. Would you say you are generally a happy person?
I'm generally happy. It's just lately there are things just keeping me down.
Can you tell me more about that? When was the last time you felt really happy?
But I try to stay happy. I'd rather be happy. My kids keep me going.
What advice would you have given yourself 10 or 20 years ago?
To not believe, to not be so gullible. To not be so gullible. I've been told recently that I have a tendency to believe people too readily without them having to prove anything, and so as a result, recently I've gotten myself in a lot of trouble. And so I think that looking back, if I could have, I would tell myself to not believe, to not be so stupid, and to think, and just to not be so gullible.
Is it uncomfortable for you to talk about this?
Yeah, it is. I hadn't really thought about that.
So that's an example of a two-dimensional avatar, and I understand that Beth was saying that the people used were not real subjects in the sense that they were actors rather than genuinely interacting, but there are a number of people saying that this kind of approach is something which is going to make a big impact in the world of therapy and talking therapies and so on. One of the extraordinary things which doctors already know is that people are often much more honest with a machine than they are with a live human being. And they'll often tell things to a machine that they wouldn't tell to a living human being. And so the idea of using artificial systems as some form of therapist is certainly being used. So we are programmed to anthropomorphize, to put our humanity onto others, and one of the interesting and troubling issues is about feeling empathy for robots in pain. Then people have done studies where you apparently torture a robot and you measure brain reactions, and you see that people's responses are similar to those of observing a human being being hurt or wounded, and there's a whole complex moral questions about would it be wrong to abuse a robot, and who is harmed in that process, and how should we think about this? And of course there are analogies with animals. So the laws about torturing animals, are they primarily to do with the good of the animal, or are they also to do with what the consequences, the effects on us are as human beings if we're engaged in torturing animals? And there are certainly voices saying that there should be regulation about what you're allowed to do with animals, and the degree, it depends on the degree of anthropomorphism with a robot. How do we think of these different beings? To what extent do we put our own humanity, project our humanity? And the idea of sex robots and the sex industry is already showing enormous interest. There's investment going into various kinds of sex robots. So undoubtedly this is going to be, again, raise all kinds of troubling questions. So for instance, would it be appropriate for someone who has a sexual orientation towards children to have a child robot? Or is that something that society should say is inappropriate and should be prohibited? How are we to think morally of these kind of complex, new, troubling questions? And isn't an event which happens in some virtual world, is that the same as an event in the real world? Does it have the same moral significance? Or is it more similar to a thought? So it's been suggested in traditional moral thinking there was a distinction between thinking about something evil and actually doing something evil. The thinking evil was in many religious traditions and philosophical traditions seen as something that was bad, but it was not equivalent to actually doing an evil act. And it now seems that there's a third category which is somewhere in between those two, which is doing an act in a virtual environment. If I'm unfaithful to my wife in virtual sex, is that equivalent to being unfaithful with another human being, or is it just equivalent to a lustful thought? So it seems that there's emerging a third category, a moral category of human actions in a virtual world. And then there is the attempt to make robots that are completely similar as similar as possible to human beings. And actually, I'm running out of time, so I won't show you the clip. But I do have a clip showing a very humanoid robot, and there are some roboticists who feel that really is the best way forward. So I think we can see a two-way movement. On the one hand, there is a movement from the machine to the human. In other words, we understand ourselves and the working of the human brain, especially by looking at machines. We understand ourselves as machines. So we take what is made and we apply it to ourselves. But at the same time, there's a movement in the opposite direction. So we take our humanity and we put it onto the machine, which is really anthropomorphism. We understand what it means to be an intelligent machine by looking at our own humanity. We project onto the machine. So here's the human, here's the machine. We take the machine in order to understand the human. There's a movement that way of mechanization, but there's also a movement of anthropomorphism in the other direction. And then I think the third phenomenon, so I think both of those phenomena we can see going on, and the third phenomenon is that historically, and particularly in a sort of Aristotelian framework, these entities were seen as being completely distinct, of having a totally different kind of being. But now what is happening is that there's a blurring of the categories, that it's no longer completely clear what is human and what is machine, and there's the possibility of a sort of a blurring, of a loss of distinction. So I think there are these three movements: the movement from the machine to the human, the movement from the human to the machine, and then the merging, or the blurring of the boundaries. And many roboticists seem to say that we want to encourage anthropomorphism. This is a good thing. There has been some debate in social robotics as to whether it's a good thing or not, but this is Kate Harding at MIT. If we want to encourage the effective use of social robot technology, we should allow its anthropomorphic framing to continue rather than arguing against it. On a practical note, wholesale discouraging of emotional relationships with social robots would require far more intervention than simply framing these interactions in non-anthropomorphic terms. In other words, it's going to happen. Human beings are going to anthropomorphize social robots, and we should encourage it. We should work with it rather than trying to say, no, this is a bad thing. It would be incredibly difficult to prevent people from projecting lifelike qualities onto something that is specifically designed to simulate lifelike qualities. Since social robots are often intended to provide companionship, teaching, therapy, or motivation, that has been shown to work most effectively when they're perceived as social agents rather than tools. And so we should frame them accordingly. So that there is this blurring as well. Jean Baudrillard, postmodern philosopher, very influential work, Simulation and Simulacra, and he said there were 4 successive phases in the simulation of reality. The first phase is that the simulation is a reflection of a profound reality. Then it masks and denatures the profound reality. Then it masks the fact that the profound reality has disappeared. And then finally it has no relation to any reality whatsoever. It's its own pure simulacrum. And of those 4 phases, he said in the first phase the image is a good appearance, and he calls that the representation of the sacramental order, which is interesting language for a postmodern philosopher. In the second, it is an evil appearance. So this is where the simulacrum masks and defaces a profound reality. He says it's of the order of maleficence. In the third, it plays at being an appearance. It's of the order of sorcery. In the fourth, it's no longer of the order of appearances, but of simulation. Those, of course, wonderful French, expansive ideas, but they do seem to be very provocative and thoughtful. So we can't be naive about simulation. Simulation is something which is profound and potentially extremely threatening, and we need and with evil consequences. It's therefore I think there's a tendency perhaps to be very naive about simulation of humanity without thinking of its possible consequences. And so can the apparently effective simulation of our humanity firstly mask or hide the nature of humanity, and then secondly denature or fundamentally alter or cause us to reconstruct our humanity? That is masking and denaturing. It is interesting that there appears to be no physical limit to the potential processing power of intelligent machines. So unlike physical systems or biological systems, which are always going to be limited by the laws of physics, once you're into a world of ones and noughts, there doesn't seem to be any, I understand, any physical limit until every single atom in the known universe is involved in the processing power. So it's effectively unlimited potential. And of course that then leads to these sort of dystopic concerns. Stephen Hawking comes in and warns artificial intelligence could end mankind. And various other thinkers, Elon Musk and others, have raised concerns about the rate of change and the rate of evolution. And this is Nick Bostrom, who has here along this axis is what he calls intelligence. And so here is a mouse, here is a chimpanzee, here is a village idiot, and here is Einstein. And so Nick Bostrom says, yeah, but what happens when we've got some AI out here, which is as much above Einstein as Einstein is above the mouse? Do we think that this being who's out here is going to be friendly? Do we think he's going to be, is going to be really interested in what happens to Einstein any more than Einstein is very interested in the interests of a mouse? And so this kind of reconstruction is now becoming something that's serious. And Bostrom has become very influential and frequently quoted as on the risks of AI of becoming totally dominant. And it's interesting, it occurs to me that if you adopt a strictly physicalist understanding of the human brain, you say in the end the human brain is nothing but connections of cells and wiring and so on, then you have to say that out of those particular configuration of cells and wiring has come everything that human beings have ever done. And that includes all the most wonderful things about humanity, of music and art and culture and science and rationality and so on, but it also includes all the most evil and terrible things that human beings have ever done has come out of that wiring. And if you really believe that, you have to say there's no reason at all why this new wiring that we've created, which in some sense emulates, is not going to do all the same kind of evil things that human beings have done. And what's more, says Bostrom, we know that the human beings, the way that human beings function is that they can be incredibly deceptive and manipulative. They can actually appear to be totally different from what they are doing. And so this has become a theme in SF, where the AI presents itself as friendly, but actually has hidden malevolent tendencies. And if you take that understanding, that is entirely logical. It's also interesting that in one sense, computer thinking is intrinsically dualistic. So you always get these dualisms between processors and program, between matter and information, and that goes very nicely with a sort of Cartesian distinction between brains and minds, this kind of very dualistic thinking. So just, I'm running out of time, just very briefly to look at some potential responses from religious traditions, and particularly from a theistic worldview, that one way of thinking of that is that the theistic worldview says that reality consists of more than matter and energy. There is another foundational category of reality. Not mind or consciousness, but persons. The personal represents some foundational ontological category. So there are relationships between I and the physical universe, an I-it relationship, but there's a completely different kind of relationship, which is an I-you relationship. And I-you relationships are different in kind from I-it relationships, and persons are different from everything else in the cosmos. And these are some of the ways in which persons are different. Persons are knowers. They know things about reality. Persons are agents. They do things. They have intentions and volitions. They make things happen. Persons are rational. They understand and use logical analysis to comprehend and change reality. Persons are communicative. They speak with the intention to be understood by other persons and the expectation their communication will be successful. Persons are creative. They're genuinely innovative and free. Persons are moral. They understand good and evil and are accountable for their moral choices. Persons are lovers. They enter into profound and committed relationships with other persons. And that category, personhood, is a category of reality that is ontologically foundational. You cannot define personhood in terms of more foundational concepts such as rationality or individuation or even relationality, because personhood is in this way of thinking, the most foundational category, ontological category there is. Persons are not reducible to matter and energy, and they're not limited to matter and energy. So if you then go back to Bostrom's, I would argue that there's another dimension. It's because what he calls intelligence is really processing power, and processing power is not the same as personhood. So if we put the personhood dimension on, we would say that the mouse and the chimpanzee don't qualify, or at least have very limited personhood, whereas in some sense both the village idiot and Einstein are persons. In this personhood category, they're equal and unique. And the processing machine out here, even if its processing power is quintillions greater than Einstein, it's not a person. Or at least that's what I would suggest. And therefore, it doesn't have the same significance. So that there are other things about being human than just processing power. And processing power is not the same as personhood. So one of the debates that goes on is can an intelligent machine in any way be regarded as a person? And one suggestion is that it's not a real person, but it's a sort of analogous person. It can play the role of a person. So maybe a virtual therapist, we know it's not a real person, but nonetheless, in this therapeutic relationship, it plays the role of a person. It substitutes for a person. So that seems to me a positive understanding of what these beings might be and how they might play a role in our society. They can be analogous to a real person. I think what's a more negative understanding is this idea of a simulated person, which sort of brings in Baudrillard, that it's simulation. It may be very effective, but simulation has all sorts of potentials for evil and for masking and denaturing reality, as he uses phrases. So we come back to these three movements, one of anthropomorphism, one of mechanization, and then the blurring between the reality. And here are my very preliminary conclusions. I am convinced that these kind of technologies are going to have a profound impact on many aspects of society, particularly in the areas of employment, care, huge sums are being invested in socially assisted robotics, idea of having an intelligent home in which you can keep elderly people. So a very strong push to try to keep elderly and impaired people in their own homes rather than into institutions. The only way we're going to do that, there are not enough human carers available to do that. The only way we can do that is to make some kind of analogous carers, some kind of these kind of technological solutions. This is what's being argued. In the field of human relationships, sex robots, other kind of robots, there are some people saying, actually, you know, I'm useless at human relationships. Wherever I go, I create damage, I cause difficulty, I've caused so many disasters, I've had failed marriages. I'd be much safer with a robot. I'd do much less damage. I could have a nice robot at home and I could program her or him to be whatever I wanted to be, and basically that would be infinitely preferable to this horrible, messy, uncontrollable human stuff. Warfare, security, leisure activities, and so on. The exponentially increasing processing power allows simulation of human behavior and cognition, and some of it embodied, some of it disembodied. And I think that obviously has many positive opportunities, but there's also obvious potential for abuse, for deception, for manipulation of vulnerable human beings. So we think particularly of the vulnerable, those with mental illness, those with dementia, children, and others. How will they respond in a world of simulated or analogous personhood? And within an orthodox Christian worldview, it's hard to conceive of any form of machine intelligence as representing human personhood, although they may play a role as substitute analogous or simulated persons. And one of the questions is it important to maintain a conceptual and morphological boundary between humanity made out of meat and machine intelligence? Or should we expect and even welcome some degree of conceptual blurring and overlapping? Is this inevitable? And rather than maintain an old-fashioned idea that these are two utterly distinct categories, should we be prepared to accept some form of conceptual blurring? And it's interesting that one of the questions which increasingly I hear secular people asking in this context, as the machines become more and more frequent, the question that is being asked is, what are human beings for? If machines are able to do everything that humans do, or virtually everything, then the question is, what are human beings for? And that strikes me as a profoundly religious question, and a question which, particularly coming from religious or Christian traditions, is something that we have things to say. So there's an urgent need for an informed and open conversation between AI and robotics specialists, neuroscientists, philosophers, theologians from Christians and non-Christian faiths, and concerned lay people. So thank you very much. That's the end of my talk, and it's been a privilege to share.
Well, thanks very much, John. Jonathan, do we have the lights off? We've got a bit of time for some questions, so I'm sure you've been provoked to think or comments by John's talk, so don't be shy, and who'd like to go first?
I sort of suspected you might do this, but you kind of skirted around consciousness, and you mentioned it once, and then it hasn't come through. Is that because people are kind of wary about invoking consciousness as being a distinctive human attribute, or what's your thoughts about that?
Obviously, it's a subject of enormous debate. I personally think it isn't the crux of the issue. Philosophers of mind talk about the hard problem, don't they, of consciousness and qualia, as though that is the Everest, the Mount Everest of the whole debate. And personally, I think that's a mistake. Clearly, consciousness is an issue, but I'm not sure it is the central issue. The fascinating thing about consciousness, as a medic, is that for all our sophistication of MRI scans, EEGs, and so on, there is no technology which is able to detect or monitor consciousness. And in fact, the only medical test there is for conscious awareness is that you prod the patient and you see what comes back. And if they say ouch, they're conscious. And if absolutely nothing happens when you prod them, they're not conscious. And so, in other words, it's an entirely behavioral definition of consciousness. That's the only way. And I don't know your conscious. The only way I know you're conscious is by applying the same medical test. And it takes years of sophistication and training to develop this ability to work out whether someone is conscious or not. So, exactly the equivalent it will happen, I predict, in the field of robotics and AI. And actually that is the essence of the Turing test. The essence of the Turing test is that it is speech behavior that effectively is the way that human beings communicate consciousness. And so sooner or later there will be AIs that claim to be conscious, that they use the kind of speech language which, if a human was using those speech languages, we would interpret it as consciousness. There are people suggesting you're going to have juries of computer psychologists who will then assess these particular programs as to whether they actually meet the criteria of being consciously aware, of meeting these consciousness criteria. If they meet the criteria, they will then be awarded some kind of rights, they must be protected from pain, from abuse, they can't be switched off without good reason, and so on. So the topic is complex, but I certainly feel in terms of the value, and I think maybe coming from the history of medical ethics, there are many beings who are not conscious in that sense, many human beings who we give respect and value to. And if you take a newborn baby, is a newborn baby conscious? Well, yes, but not in the way we understand. Is someone with dementia, severe psychosis, are these beings conscious? Well, we're not quite sure, but that doesn't change their immutable value, their personhood. And even in the extreme liminal cases like persistent vegetative state and so on, are issues of real difficulty in bioethics. So yes, it's certainly an issue. It's not an issue which is going to be easy to solve. I don't personally think it's the crux issue.
Blue shirt?
Yeah. Well, you can go first now.
Okay.
Something about Nick Bostone. The comment that you made is that there is a possibility of the super intelligent machine producing something evil.
Yes.
But can't it be other way around, that it develops certain connections in a manner that the limited notion of person as the human being is then completely transformed into something like a transpersonal entity, which is also produced out of certain kinds of connections which are yet not defined but may remain implicit in an I-thou relationship, or in the relationship between the human self and the machine other,
yes,
which needs to be explored in a very different language.
Yes.
And our contemporary divide between anthropomorphism and non-anthropomorphism.
Yes, well, thank you very much, because I think there are certainly thinkers who are saying those kind of things. They're saying that our conventional categories that may not apply in the future. And this is where there is a sort of merging between science fiction and technology, where it's possible to speculate about the entire internet of machines represents some kind of organism, that's some kind of emergent phenomena of consciousness, interconnectedness, relationality, and that human beings also have a role to play in these kind of... I think there are many technologists who would say this is just science fiction, and we're a very long way away from that. But there are others who would say this is something we need to prepare for. We need to have these discussions and to think, particularly if machines start to behave in a way which we interpret as personal, then we need to have ways of responding to that, don't we, to be thinking of it.
You had a question and then we'll go to the back.
Sure. Thank you very much for an interesting talk. So I have a question about the Watson project. So one way to philosophically distinguish humans from computers is that humans understand meaning while computers just acquire information. And I was thinking, do sort of the strong believers in the Watson project that Watson understand meaning, or that Watson merely then acquires information?
Yes, that's a very good question. So I think I absolutely agree with that distinction, and I would say well, even the word information is slippery, isn't it? Because what's the difference between information and noise? And the answer is it's what a person sees significance. So it seems to me even this word information has already smuggled in an observer, because a machine can't tell the difference between signal and noise at a conceptual level. So I think I personally would say that distinction is valid, and that Watson is merely accumulating a vast amount of knowledge. Because this is a very ongoing debate in the whole philosophy of artificial intelligence. And I don't know if you know the Chinese room thought experiment of Searle and so on, is a continual debate about whether a machine actually has meaning, or whether it's simply simulating what a human being does. To be honest, I think that debate is going to go run and run. It's not the kind of debate which anyone's going to solve anytime soon. I'm much more interested in whether it seems to have meaning, because I think that's what Watson does. It seems to be intelligent. It seems to be, well, even wise. People have used these kind of, or creative. So another example, the artificial intelligence AlphaGo computing AI program, which beat a world expert at this game Go. Apparently, in one of its games, it produced a completely different kind of move, and the world experts at Go said, that was such an amazing, wonderful, creative move. And so much so that it's now opened up a different way of playing Go. The machine has found a whole new creative thing. So it's that way we put onto the machine. We can't avoid it. We are absolutely hardwired to see meaning, to see intelligence, to see purpose, and these machines will draw it out of us.
Yes, at the back.
I was thinking about relational nature of humanity, and I would say I do believe that we learn about each other from interacting with each other. So I thought if we allowed robots to interact with us, there will be two types of interaction in society, like humans to humans and humans to robots. So for example, when I interact with robots, I will learn about myself through the lens of the robot. So that will give me a different reflection about my humanity through the lens of that robot. And what I was thinking, like, especially that's what came to my mind when you mentioned about patient-doctor's relationship and having those doctors who are more trusted. What about concept of trust, dependency, vulnerability, which actually shapes our humanity? When we start sort of promoting those type of interactions in a society, we're giving a green light to the fact, okay, trust is not needed in the society. We're going to promote independence. And sort of, I think that sort of can make us take all of those valuable aspects of those vulnerabilities about our nature and reduce us to, and I would say that will be a little bit of like reducing us and taking something that might appear to be sort of our weakness, but in a context of the society, when basically we live together, it's something that is of profound value for our interaction and the beauty and all of this. And I was just thinking, this can sort of reshape the social and psychological aspects and reduce it, and completely, we might find ourselves operating within a completely different realm of behaviors, expectations, and I think that's a little bit scary.
Yes, well, and so do I. And I think that would be an example of what Baudrillard would call the denaturing of a profound reality, that this simulated person, this simulation, is actually having very negative consequences. And one of the interesting things to reflect on is that very deeply rooted in many religious traditions, and certainly in the Christian tradition and in the scriptures and so on, is the idea of the fragility and the vulnerability and the limited nature of humanity, that human beings are made out of dust, that they are vulnerable, fragile, dependent, contingent beings, and that this is part of the created order. This is part of what God says is good. This in the Genesis narrative occurs before the fall. This is part of the goodness of creation, is that we're made as limited, vulnerable, weak beings. So in the modern zeitgeist, that is complete nonsense. I mean, to value dependence, vulnerability, fragility, limitation, this seems bizarre, even masochistic or pathological. And so people would say that now we don't have to accept these kind of things, that technology will teach us. So I think there is a sort of collision here, isn't there, between a traditional understanding of the givenness of human being, which includes the givenness of limitation and of vulnerability and exposure to pain and so on, versus this new understanding that we can do better. We can improve on the fundamental nature of humanity. And I think this is a conversation which is really going to become more and more important in the future. And it's why it's so important, I think, that people who come from a religious faith position actually engage in these debates, because if we leave these debates to the majority voice that says it's all about making people stronger and fitter and eradicating weakness and limitation as much as possible, I think we are fundamentally changing what it means to be human.
I don't know.
Yeah, not exactly robotics, but since I think connecting to the question you're answering now, what about brain enhancement? How far are we from that medically or scientifically? I wanted to ask because you are a doctor as well. So.
Yes, well,
implications of that.
Yes, I mean, smart medicines and the idea of enhancing human cognitive ability have been around for some time, and even coffee, and in some ways that is a medicine, modafinil, which is being widely used for recreational use, which is in some ways a sophisticated version of coffee, I think. So these kind of agents that are around at the moment make small changes in human cognitive function. In theory, there are manipulations. Certainly in mice, there are interventions which seem to make mice behave at a much more intelligent level, and people are saying, if it works in a mouse, maybe we can do a similar things in human beings. Coming from a medical background, I know that the problem in pharmacology, and as it is in any other physical manipulation of the brain, is that the technical problems in terms of safety, tolerance, side effects, regulatory overhaul, it takes 20 years to take a chemical from the laboratory to being used in medicine. And for this reason, although I think human enhancement chemicals are coming, they are coming very slowly, because of all the forces which slow down progress in this area. And is this really we want to spend billions on? Does a pharmaceutical company, because it costs something like $1 billion or more to bring a chemical from from the drawing board to medical use. You know, is this worth spending millions of dollars on, billions? So what I've come to realize relatively recently is that although these things are coming, they're coming slowly, whereas because of Moore's law and these exponential increases, it's computing power which is coming much faster. So many of the same issues which have been around for some time about human enhancement are being raised, but now they're raised in the context of computing technology. And I think that many thinkers in this field have missed a trick because they're still worrying about physical and biological and genetic enhancement, whereas actually I think it's the power of the ones and noughts which are likely to have which are effectively going to enhance our intelligence. I mean, that's what Watson is. It's augmenting your intelligence. You don't do it with drugs. I mean, we do it in the cloud. But effectively, it will be available to you 24/7. You will have this augmented intelligence instantly and continuously available to you. That's the kind of human enhancement which is going to come in the foreseeable future.
Okay, did you have a question at back? I think, yes, you had a question, did you? I'm afraid this will have to be the last one for this session. Sorry.
Thank you. I'll try to put it in short. So thank you very much for a very stimulating talk. I think there are 2 points I would like to make, and maybe you could possibly comment on this. We spoke about consciousness, etc. Now, one of the things which seems to me is being taken for granted very uncritically is, in particular, not just the qualia that you mentioned, David Chalmers' work, for example, there, etc. But there is another dimension to that, which, for example, is in the work of Uriah Kriegel, so-called subjective consciousness, which is actually very close to your concept of personhood. And in the philosophy of mind, and also philosophy of religion, there is a considerable amount of work on what exactly a person is. And of course, there isn't a very simple and straightforward answer. However, Kriegel's ideas, I think, come quite close to that. The problem is that in a lot of these discussions, if you follow very closely and very carefully what is being said, for example, in your clip with artificial therapists or whatever that was, the fact is that anyone familiar with actually computer science who has actually programmed something, and I'm a computer engineer myself, you actually do understand that there is nothing on the other side. It's just a set of algorithms following predefined patterns, of course taking into account some Bayesian, etc., etc. But we know that it's just a sequence of steps which are ultimately very primitive. Of course, there are billions of them and so on and so forth. So complexity for us, on a quantitative level, complexity is huge. On a qualitative level, we know it's a sequence of bits, as you mentioned. So essentially, we are, I think, I do appreciate this comes maybe strange coming from a computer software engineer, is a lot of what computer science has done, it actually has quite misleading impact. That is, for someone who is not actually a computer engineer, to hear what Watson does is amazing. But actually, once you go into detail, you realize, well, of course, it's all very useful and cool, etc. But there is no qualitative difference. There is no person there. There is no subjective consciousness, and by definition, there cannot be. And stipulations to the contrary just insist that, for example, I think. You mentioned earlier, Bostrom and others, the type identity theory where brain is the mind, I think has been rebutted. But there are still people actually working or publishing as if type identity theory is actually true, which I mean is not the case. And the functionalism as the Chinese room, that's that hasn't been demonstrated strongly either. So a lot of what is being said sounds cool, looks cool, and of course there is something to show for it. But once you start digging the surface and actually asking questions about categories of thought that are being used, it all crumbles to me.
Yes, I very much understand what you're saying, and on one level I agree with it, but I think what you mustn't underestimate is this human ability to impose what we want to see, and that anthropomorphism is so hardwired into us. So, and also it's possible for us to know, on the one hand, think of a very precious object. I think of a thing like a wedding ring. I know that this is chemicals. I know that there isn't anything else there. And yet, at the same time, this is something that is very precious, very significant, very... So we can know those two things at the same time, so that even a computer scientist could find themselves getting angry with their system and anthropomorphizing it, and because that's the kind of beings we are. We are relational beings who seek for meaning, and what I was trying to show was that actually many of the scientists are doing this deliberately. It's not they're saying, no, I must remind you, this is not conscious, this is not, no, the reverse. Let's help you to suspend disbelief. Let's find ways of drawing you in to this relationship so that you treat this thing very much as a person. That's the goal, and that's where this whole thing about the simulacrum and what is the role of the simulacrum and how might it be used in society, which I think is so important.
Thank you. On that note, let's thank John again.